recognize. There's definitely names in the cohort that I recognize. It's really lovely to see some of you, or see all of you, see some of you again, but to meet all of you here today. So I'm going to be going through pitch foundations today, and then next week going into pitch narrative, but so a bit more on the storytelling side of things. That one's going to be even more on the workshopy side, but we're going to have lots of time today as well to hear from you, to have discussion, for you to even practice a little bit if you feel you need that, or we have other opportunities as well. So as Katie said, please do jump in. You can get in the chat. Very much welcome that with emojis and words and whatever way you like to communicate. Feel free to put up your hand. I'm going to try to have my screen set up so I can see your faces, so I can have the chat as well and kind of be monitoring all the things as much as possible. So please do feel free to jump in, because we really want to meet you where you are today. And I know you're all maybe at kind of different spots. I was just hearing from Katie that you did an amazing job with your pitches yesterday. I know some of you have been pitching for a long time. So I want to really meet you where you're at, and make sure and invite your questions, and also really excited to have Marissa here who can support. Marissa, should we take this opportunity right now? Do you want to introduce yourself, and then I'll dive in and I'll open my screen and everything, share my screen and all the things.
Sounds good. Hi, everybody. My name is Maria Fosco. I've been a SheBoot investor for 3 years now. And I'm also a SheBoot champion and occasional coach and all things like that. And I also am one of the directors of the board of the Capital Angel Network. And so my background is not in startups, but I came to this ecosystem one day on International Women's Day, and I met all these wonderful people, and I said, find me something to do, because I'm staying. It's such a vibrant community. There's so much to learn from everybody's perspective. There's so much good to be done, and it's great to meet you all. I really look forward to following you on your journey.
Amazing. Thank you, Marissa. It's lovely to meet you as well. Okay, I'm gonna share my screen here. Just a moment. See how it all goes. Okay, it's been a while since I can go to slideshow, yes? Okay, now I should be able to, there we go, show grid. And I would like to bring up the chat so I have that too. So let me just get all my ducks in a row here. Yeah, no problem, Sakine. I see your message. If you can't be on video, that's fine. But I can see people's faces, I believe. Now, okay, great. Okay, pitch foundations. So who am I? For those who don't yet know me, or maybe hadn't seen me in a while, because I was on maternity leave for a while, and I haven't actually taught in, I guess, a year and a half. So this is a really exciting time for me to come back. I have worked with SheBoot in the past, and my company Volition has worked with SheBoot last year as well when I was on maternity leave. I'm super excited and energized to come back, especially to kick off my teaching again here with SheBoot and an incredible cohort such as yourselves. So if you're not familiar with Volition, we work with ecosystem partners like SheBoot, and accelerators, incubators, universities, etc., who work with incredible women founders such as yourselves and other like impact startups as well, to help bring one-on-one coaching as well as content like this on particularly the fundraising segment of that entrepreneur journey. So we have a team of advisors who all kind of specialize in different things and are able to support founders along that part of their journey. I also myself am a qualitative researcher and have worked in gender equity for women in STEM in particular since 2017, and joined the world of investing as a non-accredited impact investor. So I work how I've done that is I have joined collectives and SPVs, much like the one you'll be working with through SheBoot, or you'll be pitching to and working with through SheBoot. So joined investor groups like that, and been able to invest in some femtech and sustainability companies that are also women-led, as part of my investment thesis. And so I'm still kind of building up that side of my world after having worked with startups and investors for many years. Marissa, very similar to you, kind of came to the world of startups and absolutely fell in love with working with founders and being involved with this community and this ecosystem. In terms of being a fundraising and pitch coach, I focus on mindset, strategy, and narrative, which I think you'll get a pretty good picture of over the next couple of weeks. Okay, so today we are going to talk about investor mindset, kind of get ourselves into that. I know today is the first workshop, so let's stick ourselves into the brain of who are you going to be pitching to on, I believe, October, is it 28th, Katie? Yes. Great. And providing your data rooms to you on October 13th, I believe is the date for that one. So you'll be working closely with this investor group. They'll get to know you really well. They're going to be going through all 15 of your data rooms and pitches and watching all the things. Really exciting for them as well, I'm sure. So really want to dig into who are you pitching to so we can craft that pitch for your audience. We're going to do some pitch analysis. So I've developed a fabricated company based on a real story and a real idea, but is a fabricated company, fabricated pitch that's based on many pitches that I've seen. So I have that recorded for us, and we can all go through a bit of an exercise around a pitch analysis and get into that mindset again of if I were, well, we will be watching it, but if I were a SheBoot investor, what would my perspective be? And then how can you apply that to your own pitch? Building or refinement or updating depending on where you are in your journey. We will get into some pitch building foundations like problem, solution, opportunity, ask, all that good stuff. Again, whether you're new or have been doing this for a while, it's always nice to come back to that and maybe even focusing on areas that you feel like you've been struggling with, especially if you've had to pivot or you've adjusted your business in some way and you aren't sure how to talk about this new kind of path or new spot that you're in on your journey. And then we'll have some peer-to-peer time at the end. So we'll have a couple breaks, have less time to engage. Shouldn't be too lecture heavy, I'm hoping. Next week will be even less so, but we should have some good time at the end also to discuss and practice and all those good things. In terms of resources, we do have a Volition pitch building book that I'll share with Katie to share with you. You'll also get access to these slides. And then I'm one of the coaches that are part of or advisors, can't remember what I'm called. Sorry, Katie, advisor, I think is maybe the one that you can access if you would like some one-on-one support going forward. And also just feel free to ask in the chat if there's something that you say, hey, I like that. Do you have a resource on that in particular or something, then let me know as well. So I am going to dig in. I realize I'm talking a lot off the bat. I promise this won't be the case forevermore. But I wanted to kind of like jump in and get us kind of into the mindset here today. So today, as I mentioned, we are going to focus on mindset and structure. As much as I love narrative and storytelling, we want to make sure we're all starting from that same base point of these are the people that we're pitching and maybe what they're thinking about. And Marissa is going to be able to support us even more on that, which is fantastic. And then also, what are some of the boxes that we're going to need to tick? Volition has a pitch methodology or pitch building methodology, but have also gone through the SheBoot judge rubric, which I believe you already have access to, and made sure that we're kind of covering all of those boxes, which it does. And hopefully today's session will provide you with a roadmap for how to apply your pitch strategy and tick all those boxes for the judges that you'll be speaking to. And mindset, of course, for me means shifting our own kind of beliefs around pitching and stepping into the mindset of our audience. Whereas narrative is kind of the heart of the pitch, helps us connect to our audiences, and helps you create a clear thread throughout the pitch so that it all feels like a story in itself, and it's more memorable for you, it's more memorable for the audience. It's beautiful. I love talking about narrative, but let's just put a pin in that one at this time. So let's talk about mindset. Yes. Okay. So I'm going to get you talking in just a moment. So what I want to talk about here today is SheBoot, the SheBoot investment group. So this is a 6-week program. As we know, this is workshop 1, day 2 of this. I know you also had the summer session, so you've probably had your mind wrapped around this for a little bit. I've heard you're already super gung-ho and jumping in and getting in the data rooms and all the good stuff, which is fantastic to hear. So we have 30 investors, unless that's changed. I believe it's 30 investors. Yes, great. 30 investors, that's amazing. Angel investors whose purpose here is to give back and foster a thriving ecosystem of investment-ready women entrepreneurs. So they are here to support you. They will be pitching, assessing your pitch. They'll be reviewing your data rooms. and they're looking to invest $300,000. This is amazing, and I'm excited to learn more about what you are looking for here today, and how that 30 or 300,000 fits into your asks that you have, the raises that you're doing. So these are accredited investors who have varying degrees of experience and expertise. They have different reasons for being here. They specialize in different subject matters. Some are coming in with lots of financial backgrounds. Others are coming with legal. Others are coming in with maybe they were founders in the past. Lots of kind of different mindsets that are walking through them, much like we have here today, which is why I love the idea of doing a pitch analysis with you, because we'll start to see with all of your different backgrounds that are here today, what you're bringing into this collective group. So if we remove this transactional, the transactional lens that often comes with pitching, though, like we're pitching investors for money, there's often a bit of this kind of transactional feel, particularly when I first started teaching investment pitch back in 2016, I guess. There was very much this feeling of, this is a transaction. A pitch is a one-way conversation to someone who is taking it in. They are kind of an ATM. Their job is to give money. This is what their job is. So it's just this transaction. And I think we've all heard and learned a lot more about how everything works, how investing works. It's become a lot more transparent over the past, however long that's been now, 7-8 years. And we understand now that there is much more of a relationship lens to it. And I remember one investor saying, when I'm investing, an angel investor saying, when I'm investing, I'm thinking, is this a risk worth taking? Because this is my granddaughter's potential university fund. Like, this is a personal decision for me. And that really hit hard for me to ensure that we're thinking about this as a human-to-human conversation. And a pitch itself is not a one-way broadcast. It is the start of a conversation. And we're bearing in mind who we're talking to as in a human-to-human kind of connection way, which is really, really important. And I think that that's something that we're all more aware of, which I am heartened to hear and see. I do still hear about pitching feels icky and salesy and inauthentic. And, I feel like I've gotten so much feedback from so many different people. And so my pitch has completely Frankensteined out of control and I don't know where to go with it. And I was working with a founder, Carlin Lunkarik of Photosafe, which we'll talk about more next week. But she was saying that when she tried what she felt was a relationship building approach, that she got negative feedback, that she was being too touchy-feely. And she was saying, people weren't understanding my vision. So maybe I was talking too much about impact and not enough about the business model. So I need to become more robotic and business model focused. So we see these kinds of evolutions where we hear, yes, it's relationship building, but then we feel different when we walk into that room and we get the barrage of questions and we get the due diligence checklist. And it feels again like, yes, I understand this is a human, but also I understand that they have a job, and it can be hard to remember it's still about relationship building when you're in that, headspace. So what I wanted to do is ask you a question, which is, if you were to build an investor persona of this collective group, so we know this is a group of 30 investors, which is has anyone here raised before, but also pitched to a collective of investors, or has it been more one-on-one? Cheryl, I see your hands up. Collective of investors. Okay. And Dallas, hi. Good to see you. Amazing. So for those who have pitched to collective investors, did you find or were you aware of how it was potentially different to pitching to an investor one-on-one? Is there anything that you kind of noticed about it? You don't have to have anything, but I'm just curious. Yeah, go ahead, Cheryl.
I did. So I've pitched to a couple groups,
Mhm.
and some very, very early on in our pitching before I understood anything about angels or how collectives work. So I think for the first few, I was very unaware of the group collective decision and how it functions. And then in the second, I was just personally more aware of it. So it was much more of a easy conversation.
Mhm.
And we're still in conversation with that angel group and finalizing stuff. So I think it was much better. But yeah, it is a very different mindset.
Yeah, really interesting. Dallas, did you have anything you want to add? You can say a no.
Yeah, I find just generally my experience with collective angel groups is a different individual. With an individual, you have more of a conversation. And I find oftentimes with the angel groups, some people will chime in with their opinions, but then other people won't. And yet they do have very valuable insight to offer. So I think sometimes it's harder to get that one-on-one feedback, or you're dealing with somebody else, like their program manager, and you're not developing those one-on-one connections. And especially for early stage, that can present barriers in terms of communicating and the mission and the value of the company to those folks individually, and just that relationship building at the end of the day. But to Cheryl's point, I think it's having more of an understanding of what those processes are and how to like work it really.
Yeah, I love that. Yeah, I found working with a group of investors really interesting, particularly if there were also investors in the group who had not been a part of a group before, which I'm sure there's potentially the case with SheBoot. There might be some new investors in the group who haven't been part of a group before, which is really interesting for them as well. They might be new to investing completely, and so they are learning how to assess a pitch potentially. Maybe they've done that before, but they're learning how to do due diligence. They're trying to reconcile their own thesis. Maybe they've come up with their own investment thesis, but reconcile that with the groups, and what does the group want, and how are we going to be investing our dollars. In the cases that I was in, there was also a bit more emphasis on what will the impact of the SPV or of this collective investment be on the overall raise of the founder. So this $300,000, what impact will that be? Like, who will we be within the broader kind of conversation of their raise, which is kind of interesting as well. So I'd be curious to hear, and Marissa, I was going to pull you up for this as well, also from your perspective, what would be like, based on what we're hearing from Dallas and Cheryl, where, you know, you do have to learn how to kind of like shift as a founder and understand that you're talking to a group as opposed to a one-on-one kind of relationship. So I love the idea of finding ways to tap into your champions within the group, through your pitch and through your data room, through your due diligence, and how you're responding to questions, and your approach in general. But Marissa, is there any kind of tips at this point? I know I'm throwing you in, and I just kind of thought this idea based on what they said, but do you have any ideas or tips around how to, or if there's kind of a nuanced difference around pitching to and building a relationship with a collective versus then one-on-one?
Thanks, Melanie. I love what you just said about tapping into the individuals in the group, because that covers sort of both cases. So if you think about SheBoot, it is a collective. Those 30 investors will make one decision at the end of the day. Well, 3, you know, like first prize, second prize, third prize, but we do it together collectively. And when somebody, if you're pitching to a group, that doesn't necessarily mean that it's a collective. And you might already all know that, but it's really good. And I hadn't thought of it before now, but it's really good to have that information up front. So if you're pitching, for instance, to the Capital Angel Network, you're pitching to a group. There's a number of the members are all in the room together, whether it's virtual or in person. But at the end of the day, each of those investors are going to make their own individual decisions, right? So you do have to reach out to the ones that would be more inclined, and, you know, like call out the ones that speak to the ones who would be more inclined to have that thesis around what it is that you're trying to accomplish, whether it's impact, whether it's, you know, biotech, whether it's tech. It's really difficult to know, but during your pitch, reading the room is super helpful. And sometimes there's a huddle afterwards. So, you know, it isn't just the pitch and you walk away and wait for the phone call. You really want to build those relationships afterwards as well. Because if you're pitching to a group, after your pitch, they might come up and say, hey, you know, I want to hear more about that, or I'm sort of interested in this. And so knowing your audience is really important. And I love what Melanie said about identifying with those people. And through SheBoot, you will have the opportunity to, you know, meet the investors throughout. So just kind of tapping into them. At the end of the day, all the investors, whether they invest or not, want you to succeed. So take advantage of that, you know, take advantage of those conversations.
Yeah, I love that. Yeah, making note of which investors are asking questions. You can also go to the About Us page on SheBoot to learn more about the investors. I'm not sure, Katie, are you providing like more of a breakdown of the 30 investors in this group?
No, we don't provide a breakdown of each one of our investors. Some also choose not to be in the
Yeah.
spotlight while they
Yeah.
still invest.
Yeah.
But there is an opportunity to connect with the investors, and as well, each one will pitch. Everyone's been assigned a coach. Some are investors as well with the group. So there's definitely ways to connect. We also have multiple of our investors, including Marissa, who join our workshops. So there's a way to get an understanding there.
Yeah.
In the group. Yeah.
I
Yeah,
just want to
Marissa.
add something to that. With SheBoot, it is a collective. So remember, it's that one decision, right? And so you'll have lots of opportunity. More specifically, what I mean is when you're pitching to a group, but at the end of the day, they're individual decisions, there you really need to go and find out who you need to have that follow-up relationship with.
Mm-hmm. I think even in a collective, it's interesting though, because you start to see, as I was mentioning before, the champions in the room who then will fight for you in some way. And it might be like, yeah, they're not ready yet. They don't meet our investment thesis, but do people have connections for this person? Because I want to personally maybe invest on them on the side, or I am really interested in, working with this one person in particular. Does anyone else from the cohort want to? So there becomes like that opportunity to get to build relationships one-on-one, and kind of pay attention to those ones that are maybe asking more questions when you pitch, or their faces light up and they smile when they hear about your mission, vision, the impact that you're making. If you see them on the About Us page and notice that they're in the room, maybe they are in medtech and that's what the space that you're in, or whatever it happens to be. So kind of taking note as much as you can, even though it's a one decision. Jane, yes.
Yeah, I just want to jump here. And Melanie, I think you're the only person I haven't met here. I'm Jane with SheBoot, so we haven't actually formally
Oh,
met.
right, of course.
Yeah, but I just wanted to build on what both you and Marissa are saying from my previous experience with Capital Angel Network. One thing I noticed when people are pitching to the group, even though they're making individual decisions, and as Marissa said, read the room, the dialogue amongst the investors in front of the entrepreneur is very interesting, because you can see when there's an expert in whatever, name the subject, AI in the room, and the others will look to that person to weigh in, because they know that they've got the experience and perhaps a portfolio that's big in that area. So it is a really kind of interesting dynamic between the collective and the group.
Yeah, for sure. And interesting behind the closed doors as well, the conversations, which I have on my next two slides, which is, so being the qualitative researcher I am, in the collective groups that I was in, I was taking note of I was doing like categorical analysis on the kinds of questions that they were asking the cohort, and then the kinds of conversations they were having behind the scenes. So I wanted to jump into that. So in the cases that I was in, which was, they were impact investors, one was for health tech and one was for gender. It was a like gender-based impact investor challenge. So the kind of questions and conversations they were having in the background in particular. So they were saying out loud questions around, the question was centered around competitive advantage, particularly over time. So what competitive advantage will you have long term? What's your moat? How are you, like, maybe this is a space that you're doing a lot of research and development in. So like, what's going to stop someone who's maybe already out there in the market from just like picking that up before you do? So those kinds of questions around competitive advantage, scalability. Often that when people are asking questions about scalability, that had to do with market doubt that they had, team capacity and experience lacking, or red flags they were seeing, lack of a reasonable sales model or sales plan, as well as confusion around the business model. And then they're also asking questions around the fundraising ask. So asking like, are you raising enough? What will this actually buy? So it was a lot of like trying to understand they're trying to understand the level of risk that they would be taking, as well as if the opportunity matches their investment thesis at a high enough or level, like at or sorry, not high enough, base enough level to kind of move forward, for them to then be the ones to be like, oh, I do want, like, I'm excited to ask questions. So they're kind of like things ticking and boxes ticking in the back of their brains to be like, oh, this doesn't mean anything. I'm just gonna kind of like let the people in the group who know more about this or are more interested in kind of take the reins, or actually, yeah, this is something I'm going to jump in and ask questions. But it was interesting because in the background, they were asking similar questions, like, but the language they use, of course, is a bit different when they turn to other investors and are just like, yeah, this is a low ask, or like, I don't get how this is going to scale. I'm concerned about this. It sounds reproducible. I don't understand what it is. And what's interesting about this is, as one of the questions, as I was mentioning before, come out to you during, I think it was a 6-minute Q&A in this particular instance, although you do have also weekly practice leading up to your pitch, which is fantastic. You'll get some of those questions and start to understand better where people are having that confusion. When you hear these questions, as I mentioned before, it does feel transactional. That's because it has to be at this point. It is to do with the due diligence process and to decide to kind of like do a basic filter at that point. But what was interesting then is, as the course of the program went on and as investors got to know the companies, and what's beautiful about these kind of programs is they do get to know the companies over much longer than when they just hear one pitch at some sort of a forum or event, is that they then made their final decisions based on fairly different things. Once they've done that basic filter of, is this does this align well enough with my investment thesis, and am I willing to take a risk based on what I'm hearing? So the questions they were then asking, or sorry, the way that they chose was, aside from that return on investment, was, is this founder and company a good fit for me as an investor? And it's a lot more aligned with that, even though it was a collective and they may not have had a lot of time to do one-on-one relationship building. They still kind of like been following the company for at least the 6 weeks of the program, potentially a lot longer. So as you see, one of the things they were saying is, I know the founder already. So they may have been seeing your name in the news already for a while. They may have seen you pitch at a competition, maybe seen you at a different forum, whatever it happens to be. They actually know you, or they know someone who knows you and has talked highly of you. You can start to see where bias really comes in at this point, of course, which is a very real hurdle to be facing. And I know SheBoot is going to have a due diligence deep dive and talk about questions and how to reframe things based on some bias that we know will be coming up. But you can start to see where that's happening here, even at this level. So they were talking about, is this founder and company a good fit for me as an investor? It had to do with the relationships built outside of and within the program. It also had to do with, are they solving a real problem? And is this a real pain point in my world? So where that comes in is like, when that subject matter expert then sees that you're talking about something that they know about and are like, yes, like that was such a pain for me when I was a doctor for 30 years. You know, that's what I heard a lot in the health tech one, was like, yes, I experienced that. That was so horrible. That was so annoying. That cost lives, that, you know, whatever it was. So that can make like a really strong champion when someone's saying that's a real problem. And we'll like fight for that in the room when someone else is like, I don't think that's a problem. They're like, no. Like, this is something that I've experienced. And they'll like really fight for that, which is interesting to see. And then the last things, there's the relationships, solving a real problem, coachability becomes a big one. Like these things that are in these bubbles were real things that investors said, saying like, I like the founder's energy, things like that. They seem really coachable. I'd like to work with them. I could see us coaching them. I could see us working with them, because they're going to be investors in your company. They're going to ideally be continuing a conversation with you, and you'll be looping them in via your email updates that you're doing, your stakeholder updates, and you'll be building more relationships with them. They'll be helping you along the way. So want to have that good relationship. So if they feel like this is someone who's coachable, this is someone who I feel a fit with, again, lots of bias, little up here, but that becomes really important at that decision-making moment. And lastly, impact is not last, but it's really important, impact as well. And when I'm talking about impact here, is not impact as in like an impact startup or impact first kind of startup. That can be a part of it if part of the investor's investment thesis has to do around impact. But it can also be, as I mentioned earlier, the impact of the funds of this particular collective. So what will that 300,000 do in the grand scheme of this person's raise, as well as the impact of the solution itself in the world, which can be financial or social or environmental or whatever happens to be. So those were kind of interesting findings that I saw. I don't know if it's surprising at all, any of this, but what I'd love to understand is there anything, Marissa, perhaps Jane as well then, that you would add at this point that you think I know we've already dove into it quite a bit around like the collective and everything, but knowing SheBoot as well, is there any like inside perspective around what goes into decision making?
I feel like I've been in both these rooms that you've highlighted here. So like this is absolutely accurate. I feel you covered it really well. I just want, just at a very high level, investors need to be able to do two things. They want to be able to make a difference, and at the end of the day, they need to get a return on their investment, right? So those are the two mindsets that they're going in with, and everything else sort of cascades off of one of those, but they do need both of those things. So just keep that in mind.
Hallie.
Yeah, thank you, Melanie. I'm just trying to understand how you got from like the first slide where there was a lot of skepticism to this second slide. Is it because the investors, you know, like spend time with the founders during the pitch practices, or like how do you go from so much skepticism to so much positive energy towards the founders? How does that happen?
The positive energy is but that's just the founders who have decided that they really like that particular founder. You also hear other things from other investors, but how it goes from those two is, to Marissa's point, there's the I want to make a difference, and there's this has to have a financial impact. There has to be a return on investment. So that initial filter, which comes through the pitch and the initial kind of meetings with the investor, that's when they're going to be coming in with those questions that make you feel like this is transactional, because it is. And it sounds like skepticism. That's what we're hearing, is this sounds like skepticism, because they're looking, I mean, they have to be interested enough to even ask the questions, because there are investors who will just hear a thing and say, no, I'm not even gonna ask a question. Or like, I'll come up with a lowball question, like, well, it's not really a lowball question, but like, I don't really understand the business model. Like, that's not a lowball question, it's really important. But if they don't understand the business model from your pitch, that's a longer road to have to get to a point where they're excited to invest in, whether, as opposed to if they're asking what might feel like really hard-hitting skeptical questions, especially around numbers. And I've seen one investor who just hammered like 20 difficult financial questions in a row at this woman, at this one, just like so quick. And she was just like, answer. And she walked away feeling like that was horrible. And I really that didn't go well. But the investor was like, that was great. Like, I asked so many hard questions and they got it. And I only asked questions because I was interested. And, so that's kind of one of the pieces I want to talk about around mindset, is like, the questions they're asking out loud are from that analytical perspective. You're listening to the pitch, you're thinking analytically, you're thinking, is this an opportunity? Does this fit my investment thesis and the impact I want to make? But first and foremost, also, will this create enough? Is this scalable enough? Is this going to create the kind of return on investment that I need to be able to invest in it, and invest that like my granddaughter's potential future in, like, so they're going to be thinking those tough questions to decide if they're going to have a second conversation with you. So then the second slide you're seeing are the investors who decided to continue to have a conversation. By the end of the 6-week program, maybe they'd even seen that at the beginning of the program, the pitch was quite weak even, but by the end of 6 weeks, it was like, oh, that's actually super clear now. I've seen them put in the work. I can see that they're super coachable. I can see that they really want to put their best foot forward, that every time that we said, hey, where's your this, they went and found it, or they provided a reason as to why it wasn't there and a date that they would follow through, and then they actually followed through. Like, it was a lot of the relationship building, and they still are going to have hard questions, because also what you're seeing here is them deciding, well, in that case, it was kind of like the SPV, but they'd already done a lot of due diligence at that point. So, but there's also continued due diligence afterwards, is my point. Like, so even after this point of like, yeah, this is a real pain point. I know the founders, I like their energy, they're coachable, and I've already done my initial filter with all the skepticism and all the hard questions. Now we dig into the real juice of it, and we get into like hard due diligence. So this isn't a point where they've just handed you money as well. But it's kind of like the evolution. That's how I took it anyways. That's how I take it. Marissa,
And
yeah.
that first slide, Melanie, the first slide that you showed, answering these questions gets you to the second slide. to
Yeah,
answer your,
yeah.
like none of this screams no to me. All of it is, I need more information. I want to know, what is the impact? I need to know what the traction and market validation, so that I can then think about those questions on that second slide.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, thank
Yeah.
you both. Appreciate that. Thank you.
Yeah, you're very welcome. So to wrap up this section, and if you have more questions, please take note of it. Feel free to ask us at any time as we go along. But to wrap it up a bit in terms of how I think about reframing the pitch is to think about it as this opportunity, this tool that you have in your toolbox in order to build relationships, to generate enough of that intrigue and trust in what you're building and in you and your team in order to have those second, third, etc. conversations to better assess fit. And I don't mean assess fit necessarily with the investor assessing their fit with you and your opportunity, which is true, but also the other way around. Is this a good fit for me to be working with this investor or this investor group at this time, potentially? And to Marissa's point, all the like, this doesn't scream no to me, is I also want to emphasize that even if there is a no, that doesn't necessarily mean no forever. And it's really great to continue to ask questions and build those relationships. And also you're gonna I have refine the message here. So pitching is a great opportunity to refine your message, to be aware of building a Frankenstein pitch by accident because you got so much feedback and keep changing it, but we'll talk more about that next week. But you'll have this opportunity every Friday to pitch and to learn and to take feedback and then to decide what to actually keep and what to not keep and all those good things. And that's what you need. Like you need kind of like hours of practice and refinement and keeping in mind this particular investor persona. And then you'll be pitching at SAS North and other opportunities. Those are other audiences, different approach. But here we're talking about this particular group. So thank you for that section. So wrapping up pitch mindset, I want to move on to pitch analysis. So this is where I was going to take a bit of a break because it is a bit of a natural break as we're going into a bit of an exercise. But if you're feeling good, the exercise section is kind of like 15 minutes. And then we get into like the meat and potatoes of what is problem, solution, opportunity, ask, and all those pieces. So I'd love to ask the group, do you feel you would like to take 5 right now and just kind of like work through some things in your brain and put together all the good stuff and learnings so far? Or how is everyone feeling about moving on? So if you could put maybe in the chat either like a Y for yes, let's go on to exercise, I want to do the pitch analysis, or an N for I want to go on a break. I see one vote for 5 minutes. Rashmi, I see your, so how about, I see most people are saying, yes, let's keep going. I saw one, let's take a break. So what we could do is if you need to go take a bio break or something like that, Alina, I can jump in to quickly answer Rashmi's question because it's something we are going to also talk about next week. Does that sound good? Great. Fantastic. Okay, Frankenstein pitch. Yeah, so I won't get too much into it. This was, I don't know if I invented it, but this is how I feel about pitches that I hear when they come to me and I'm just like sitting there listening to it. And it happens all the time. This is usually when I start working with a founder, is when they are feeling like this is no longer my pitch. I don't hear my voice in it. This doesn't feel authentic. This feels half sales, half investor pitch. I don't know what's happening here. My story feels flat, or my story feels like it's disjointed from the rest of the pitch, and or it feels like I'm like, this is the business model, this is the team, this is this, and you're kind of telling like a little story for each box that you're supposed to tick, as opposed to it feeling like a more compelling narrative. So how do you know when to stop? So Rashmi, do you want to do you feel comfortable jumping on and sharing a bit about where you feel like you're at?
Yeah, absolutely. Sorry, I'm just walking outside right now, so I apologize if it's a bit noisy. But I feel like in terms of my pitch, I guess where I feel like it's heading in that Frankenstein zone is I don't know. I almost feel like there's like so much advice coming in from a lot of different advisors, and I'm trying to be like, okay, we need to have some information at the beginning, but we also need to have some information at the end. And like the story that I originally crafted has almost become quite disjointed. And so I feel like, I don't know if it's just because I've pitched the pitch so many times that I'm struggling to have the enthusiasm behind the pitch, or if it's actually just that like I've changed it up so much to take into account so many different types of advice that I think is actually really good and makes a lot of sense, but it no longer feels like my story. I feel.
You are not alone. I see heads nodding from both investors and founders here, but also it's something that we hear a lot. Has anyone else here feel like they have had a Frankenstein pitch that they then managed to evolve from? Did anyone get out of the Frankenstein mode? Dallas, you're thinking about it. I know you've pitched a few times, probably gotten, and I know you've gotten a lot of feedback too.
A lot of feedback, and it can definitely be exhausting. I feel like even in this moment, I'm also sort of experiencing it just because, you know, things change so often as well. It's almost hard to differentiate between like a pivot or something that's like fundamental to the business that's changing, and then also that feedback that's just a way of communicating it in a different way. And that's something that I'm even trying to categorize as well. I haven't figured it out, but I'm just reflecting and nodding and being like, yes, I agree.
Yeah. Yeah. So this is a tricky one. I have found like, Rashmi, to your point, it might be because you pitched it many times, but I have found that when a founder gets back to a place where it feels good, it feels authentic, it feels like the story they want to tell to invite the kind of investors that they want, and they have that end in mind of who is the investor that I want to work with and who am I pitching and how do they feel when they hear me pitch and how do I feel when I'm pitching to them, and having that in mind. And yes, all these boxes we're going to talk about today are very important, and that's something we're going to have there as the foundation, but then you can layer on top of that or kind of like put that aside for a minute and think about, how do I want to feel? And if you want to feel confident and you want to feel at ease with your pitch, that is something that often someone maybe outside of your own brain can help you with. I found, well, maybe I'm biased because I tend to be the pitch coach working, or one of the pitch coaches working with these people, but it has really helped for me to say, okay, just talk to me as if I'm just a friend. Talk to me about like, what is your favorite story about your company that you like to tell? And we kind of start there. And then we go into, okay, who is your audience? And let's take the script, get rid of the pitch deck altogether. Share with me your favorite pitch deck you ever had. Share with me what you currently have. Let's get rid of the pitch deck and just go through the script. Go through the script. Where are you stumbling? What's hard to remember? Where do you feel icky? Which I can tell. I can tell when you're like, oh, I don't really want to be talking about this. Or like, because you'll hear a founder's voice go down a bit, and like they maybe the story they've told is something that they care about, or they've totally lost the story because they feel like they shouldn't be talking about that anymore. But if there is a story there, maybe you'll see that enthusiasm, and then they'll be like, and this is how we're going to do that, and our financial projections look like this, and our plan to scale is this. We have a team of 3, and we're raising this amount, and thank you, kind of thing. And you kind of hear where, or like actually usually they go, and we have a team of 3 and they're fantastic, and we're going to do this and blah blah blah. So typically in the pitch, where I can tell there's like a bit of a Frankenstein situation, is if they tell a story, their energy is up. When they talk about their team, their energy is often up, unless there's a bit of a red flag issue in the team, and then they might try to avoid it altogether. But it's how I like to do it, and how you could do it is you could record yourself and then have yourself and or people on your team, or people who are your coaches. You have coaches in this program, so why not ask them, where do you see my energy going up? And that's like kind of a first step that I'll do with you, is like, where do I see energy up? If I'm seeing no energy, let's just talk about, what do you love about your company? Why did you build it? Why, like, where did this start? What's a story you love to tell? Do you have a customer story that you love to share because it shows the impact that you've created? What are things you don't like talking about? What is making you feel uncomfortable? And there's like, it takes a long time. So like next week I'll be talking about working with Carlin Lancarrick. That took 2 months and like a long time of her practicing with lots of people, getting feedback specifically on delivery and story. And then we also made sure she didn't lose all of the buckets as well. So I know that we're going to do this a lot more next week, but to say to not give up. And there are ways to come back to it feeling authentic. And I'll show you next week Carlin's initial pitch, and then the one that she delivered at the forum that she won the People's Choice, the $20,000 with. And you can see in her body language how much that shifted for her. So it is possible. And that was within just kind of like a 6-week time frame as well. So we can get there. And I see also Marissa and Jane both have perspectives to bring in. So I'd like to invite Marissa, I think you had your hand up first.
Melanie, I love that. Where is your energy going? I love that, and keeping an eye on that makes perfect sense. I also want to say you don't have to incorporate every piece of feedback into your pitch. You know, you've come to the right place. You want to do pitch practice? You've come to the right place, but you're going to get a lot of feedback. So what I would encourage you to do is keep track of it, because you do need to answer that question. Look for reoccurring themes. You know, when more than one person is saying, what about this? What about this? What about this? You want to focus on that a little bit. It has to speak to you, right? Like just answering the question because somebody else wants you to incorporate it into your pitch isn't always the answer. You have to be able to see value in that change. So think about that a little bit as well. And at the end, it's your pitch, right? So I'm not absolutely not saying disregard what people are saying, but I'm saying you get so much of it, as a couple of you have said, that you've got 15 minutes. You can't possibly, but look for themes, look for things that speak to you, and then look for that energy that Melanie is talking about.
Jane.
Perfect setup for the comment I was going to make, which is about the pitch practices. And I'm putting in a plug for your Friday pitch practices, which are going to be happening over the next 6 weeks, which can be a little unnerving. However, I really encourage you to invite your coach to those pitch practices, because they can help you parse through that feedback. Like to Sakina's point here about it's hard to, you know, you get a lot of feedback and you get a lot of conflicting feedback sometimes. And I've seen it sitting through all the pitch practices last year. One week, a founder's told one thing, the next week it's completely different. But having your coach there as well would really help kind of guide you, as because they're obviously walking through this journey with you over the next 6 weeks. So that's just a plug for Friday pitch practices and your coach.
Yeah, and I'm just going to build on that quickly. If your coaches can't attend, I'll give you this detail afterwards, but each one of your coaches has access to the recording of your pitch week over week, as well as you. And Jane and I work to make those available as quickly as possible. So amazing tip. I haven't heard it put that way. I love Melanie's suggestion on just actually paying attention to the energy, that's something that you can actually absolutely refer back to in the recording of your pitch, and have your coach do that as well, to be able to identify those key points where you're seeing the energy shift and change. And I just wanted to emphasize that the recording is there, so there isn't that time pressure if the timeline doesn't work out with your coach's schedule.
Yeah, thank you so much. Yeah, I think having like that coach, that like someone with you for the 6 weeks is going to be so important, because they understand what you're doing and what you're wanting to achieve and how you want to feel, more than that Friday, you know, here's all the feedback. Because as we talked about earlier, we all come with different experiences and expertise and stories, and we all learned how to pitch in different ways. And I'll be talking about like Volition's, you know, approach, and some of my like personal approaches, like the Frankenstein pitch, those kind of things. We all come because we all see all these patterns over time and come up with conclusions in our mind and think it's the most important thing that I tell you this thing about your pitch that you should change. So, but you know your pitch and your company best. And so I think those were all really great points. And I think very much like that first slide that I showed of some of the questions that I was talking about, like around competitive advantage and business model and those pieces, those are ones you do want to make sure you're probably getting. Depends on what your stage is as well of your company, where you have to spend more time on perhaps to build more trust, or if you're later on, you can talk more about where you are right now, where you're going to be going. Whereas if you're earlier stage, you might want to talk a bit more about your past and build some confidence around that. So it kind of, there's no like one size fits all kind of suggestion here, but the point is that you don't have to have a Frankenstein pitch at the end. We can get to a place where even those parts that you're like, I feel uncomfortable talking about this part, how do we make that less uncomfortable? How do we tie that into your story in a way that feels good and memorable for you as well? Because often the parts we don't want to speak to, we also tend to stumble over and forget. And that can be really hard, especially in a live pitch situation, which I know you will have an opportunity to do in November. So thank you. That was a really great conversation, really great question. I appreciate that. And yeah, we can definitely talk about it even more. Come next week prepared. For those who have the Frankensteins, we'll talk about that, and all the content's kind of relevant to that, but I'll do like a segment that's just on Frankenstein. I saw someone saying they have a Frankenstein's daughter as well, which is fun. I love all the references. I'm glad it resonates. It's not just me. Amazing. Cool. Okay, so we're gonna go on to pitch analysis now. So as I mentioned, I'll come back to that in a second. I'm going to show you a pitch. It's a 4-minute pitch in this case, which I didn't want to take up all your time with the 10-minute, but also it is a fabricated company, so I didn't have a ton to elaborate on, but it is a real story. And it's a real idea that I had at the time. And I've since learned that it is potentially real technology behind it. There's some technology that came out in 2022 that was researched and published that could be used for this device that my brain decided needed to exist in the world. But other than that, it is fabricated. So don't go showing the pitch around, and just know that everything about it otherwise is fabricated, what it looks like, everything. So you're aware. And it's also, it's a med tech kind of device. And I know there's people here who know a lot more than I do in that space. So this is a really great opportunity. What I'd like you to do, everyone in the room, is to step into the mindset of that SheBoot investor. Say that you have decided to join this cohort with your expertise, and this founder is pitching to you, and you are considering, so get out a pen and paper, whatever you happen to need, and a bit of a critical mindset, and think about what, Marissa, I loved like how you had put that around the impact that I want to make, as well as, I can't remember exactly what you said, but essentially the return on investment, like what is the business opportunity here? Is it worth taking that risk? So you don't need to have like wherever you're at in terms of your pitch expertise, it doesn't matter. So wherever you're at, like a room of investors is going to have lots of different levels of expertise as well. So this is a really great kind of like space to do this in, and think about what is compelling, what stuck with you, that would make you lean in and want to ask questions, versus what kind of makes you be like this is, I don't know about this. This is a red flag. This is the questions that I would have. And I'd love for you to not only bring your own expertise and experience to this, but also for those that are struggling with particular areas of your pitch, maybe tune into those areas a little bit more even, and think about how would I critique or ask questions about that section of the pitch, to get you thinking a little bit around how you might even adjust your own based on that. It's also an imperfect pitch, so there is definitely critiques to be made about this, and lots of questions. There's always questions, even if it is a perfect pitch, there's lots of questions. So with no further ado, are there any questions about what we're just about to do, or is it fairly clear at this point? Looks clear. I see thumbs, I see nods. Great, cool. All right, no further ado. Let's just make sure this works. Okay, so I'm gonna stop. And I think I'll just share right to the Loom video itself. Does a perfect pitch really exist? That's a great question. I guess it depends on how you define a perfect pitch for yourself. There are pitches where at the end you're like, I'm glad I existed in this moment to hear that pitch. Like it was beautifully done. And I don't know, I've definitely seen pitches where I do feel really good about having listened to it and watched it, you know? But those people then say, yeah, I've done this like 50 billion times. So it takes a long time to get there. And I don't know, yeah, perfect is a problematic word to begin with. So, okay, let's see. I have to go to it in we'll just get to the right spot here. Share. There we go. Now share sound. So let me know if you're having any problems with the sound once let me just make this. Hide that. Oh, Zoom. Make it, I think I can make it big. Why can't I? Does anyone know how to make it big? How do I make it take over the thing here? Weird. Nope. Oh, sorry. I thought that and this is why you should practice before you do things. Okay, I can just play it from here because I don't actually see how to easily make it big enough. Anyway, can everyone see it though? Can't see your faces. Hold on. Yeah? Okay. We'll do it from here.
Yes.
Great, thank you. Okay. Let me know if you can hear it as well. Hi, I'm Melanie Ewan, co-founder and CEO of Orbital. On June 9th, 2023, I went into labor with my daughter, Izzy. What followed was a grueling 48-hour ordeal, ending in an emergency C-section. We learned that our daughter had been in a stargazer position, unable to descend vaginally. This experience left me angry, not at the medical team, but at a system lacking the tools to identify and address this common issue earlier. I knew there had to be a better way. This realization sparked the creation of Orbital, a solution born from personal experience and a deep desire to improve maternal care for all. Fetal malposition affects millions globally, leading to prolonged labor, increased interventions, and complications. It increases C-section rates by 40%, PTSD risk by 45%, and maternal mortality by 2 to 4 times. And the economic impact is staggering. Prolonged labor increases hospital stay costs by 50% per case, contributing to a 7 to 10 billion annual global economic burden. In regions with limited access to skilled birth attendants, all of these issues are magnified, and fetal malposition is responsible for up to 8% of maternal deaths globally. These devastating outcomes highlight a clear problem that current monitoring methods struggle to detect and address effectively. Introducing Orbital, a groundbreaking solution in fetal monitoring. Our lightweight, comfortable, wearable device uses advanced technology to accurately predict and monitor fetal position 24/7. It provides real-time alerts to healthcares and seamlessly integrates with existing healthcare systems. In early trials with the Maternal Health Midwifery Collective, we've seen a 35% increase in early malposition detection and a 25% reduction in prolonged labor cases. And while we do have competitors in the market, our healthcare integration, comfortability, and patented ultrasound and AI predictive analysis algorithms set us apart. We'll hit the market with our direct-to-consumer rentals first, and later we'll go to market with our hardware and software, targeting hospitals, OBGYN clinics, and birthing centers. And the fetal monitoring market is big and growing, with key market drivers including rising C-section rates and increasing demand for improved maternal care technologies. The US and Canada make up about 5% of this global market, and if we aim to capture 10%, we're looking at a $100 million share of this market. And that's possible with our customer segments. Our revenue projections include our hardware with 70 to 75% margins, as well as our D2C rentals and software licensing. This model shows significant growth, with revenue reaching nearly $50 million by 2030. And our journey to date has only been possible due to our strong management team, with extensive experience in maternal care, business operations, manufacturing, and AI engineering. Our team is excited to continue building momentum over the next 18 months. This looks like beginning clinical trials in Q1 2025 and aiming to launch direct-to-consumer product in 2026. So far, we have raised $500,000 in non-dilutive funding and are seeking $1.5 million to drive our mission of making childbirth safer and more informed for every family worldwide. Join us in setting a new standard of care in obstetrics through innovation and compassion. Thank you for your time. I'm happy to answer any questions. And that's me revolutionizing the world of imaging. Thank you. Okay, so I would love to know, what did you take note of? So let's start with, what did you feel was compelling? What might make you want to ask more questions? Or, you know what? I am going to flip that, actually, because we started with it flipped, didn't we? It's more skeptical. Let's start with, what are the red flags? What were you skeptical about? What are the questions the hard-hitting questions that you would potentially have asked? And you can put it in the chat, or feel free to put your hand up, and there's no wrong answers here. And Marissa and Jane and Katie, you're also free to. Yeah, so how does it integrate with healthcare system? Does it connect with every EHR? And privacy concerns with push and pulling data? Fantastic. So Yubin, am I saying your name correctly? Yubin, is your background in this space? Is your technology in this space?
Yes, I'm also a medical student.
Yeah, so you can start to see, even with that, the kinds of questions that are coming out. What is their background in medical care? Do they have a CSO or board of advisors in medical care? I'm not actually going to answer all the questions, by the way. Again, not a real company. I did think through these things, but yeah, and what was actually interesting is, with the privacy concerns, that's something that me, as the founder pitching, I was aware that privacy concerns is going to be one of the main things, especially with people who come from a medical background or anything in a space that understands like the privacy issues around people's data. And even like with my model with doing D2C as well as B2B and all the things, that privacy concerns is kind of like going to be first and foremost. And it's probably something, if I was pitching particularly angels in med tech, like when I was in the health tech impact investor group, that ideally that's something I would answer in my pitch, because every single company in that cohort was asked about privacy. And so ideally I would be like looped, or like kind of thinking about that, and make sure that I'm addressing that concern that like every investor in that cohort had at the top of their brain. And it was kind of a red flag for them to be like, if they didn't mention privacy, it means they are not thinking about it. But not all investor groups will think about that first, potentially. Yeah, business model was D2C, but problem was highlighted as a hospital cost. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and actually, like, I also didn't explain when I was going to launch B2B as well. I mentioned D2C, but not B2B, or not when I was going to start talking to, even though I was already doing a pilot with a midwife clinic. What are regulatory and reimbursement considerations? Yeah. Why D2C and why B2B and B2B? Yeah. And I couldn't get the details on the competitor side, financial projections and milestones. Yeah, so interesting. So these questions, Marissa and Jane as well, what would be, if this was a real company in the cohort, what would your initial thoughts, like with all these potential questions popping up in your mind, is there anything that hasn't been captured here that you would be thinking right off the bat?
I was typing my questions in, and by the time I typed them, you guys had put them in your chat. So like, kudos. So I thought, in terms of the pitch was 4 minutes, there was a long time explaining the problem for the 4 minutes you had. You know, had you had longer, maybe that wouldn't have been. So that was a comment I had. A little bit more about the IP. You know, how you mentioned IP, but a little bit more details, and then the FDA approvals. A couple of people mentioned that as well in the chat. And what are you going to do? There was a slide about the ask, and you'd be surprised how many people don't put a slide about the ask in there. So that's super important. And tell me what you're going to do with the funds, right? Like it was on the chart, but it was also 4 minutes, so too quick to see. Otherwise, great pitch.
Thanks. Jane, did you have anything you'd like to add? Or
No,
Katie?
no, I think
Don't see
everything's
lots of
covered
pitches.
here. Thank you.
Awesome. Yeah. Amazing. Okay. So you're starting to see kind of the things going on in people's heads that they may not be saying out loud, but they're thinking about the same kinds of questions over and over again. So these are potentially questions you could ask in Q&A. For some people, maybe they would say, you know, this didn't address X, Y, and Z, or I'm not interested in D2C. Probably more likely, I'm not interested in the hospital play because this is going to be far too long of a potential path to me getting my money back or whatever that happens to be. I did work with some investors who didn't want to work with any companies that were looking to get into hospitals and education system to a degree as well, or military or anything like that. Even though there's a huge potential return on investment, it was way too long of a sales thing. Got my brains losing the words. But so that's sometimes just the perspective. Also, the age of the investor will impact what kind of companies they want to invest in, or if they're investing for their grandchildren versus for themselves. So these are the things we got to think about when we're talking about human to human, is why are they investing as well, and what will they be thinking about, and what's going to be going into their decision making behind it. So given all these questions that kind of came up in mind, and honestly, this is the kind of thing that these are the questions that would have been said out loud. Good question, Tali. I'll come back. Right. Actually, no, I'll come back to that. What did you hear or see? Like what felt compelling? What made you think this is something that I liked or that would work, or that even what's something that I liked or that worked with this pitch? Mm-hmm. The story. Yeah. And so that's also, Katie, go ahead.
Yeah, I was just going to say also the pace. Like I found you were speaking really clearly and it was consistent. I mean, as you evolve this company, maybe there's opportunity for a little more energy or a little more emotion at the beginning, but in terms of the actual pace and you using the full 4 minutes, I think you spoke really clearly. And for investors, I know that's one that I hear consistently back. If the pace of the founder is too quick and they're also showing slides at the same time and the slides end up having real data on it, they're not able to process the data and process what the founder is saying at the same time.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. And I know you're going to have a really good session later on in the program about pitch design that I think will speak to a little bit around, or a lot about, the design of the deck itself. And my takeaway on that is always, like, you are the star of the show. Your deck is your supporting actor. It's intended to drive home points, but not be the thing that people are referring to all the time. Ideally, and like to Marissa's point, if saying out loud what the use of funds is, if that's something you need to do, and maybe even more so in an investor pitch kind of space, or if it's unclear what you would be using those funds for, then where was I going with that? Oh, then make sure you said it out loud and not just have it on the slides, to Marissa's point, because essentially things you really want them to walk away having remembered are the things you want to have said out loud, and then it's underscored by the content on the pitch deck itself. And I think that use of funds question is also really interesting, or comment that you made, Marissa, is really interesting as well. And a point I want to make about that, because I do see the ask slides often left off. I think in SheBoot, there's one thing they're going to do where you're going to ask them to leave an ask slide off, right? There. Yes.
Yeah, we ask founders whenever you do the 3-minute pitch to just leave the ask slide off. That's to the general community, which does include investors, but is lots of different folks that are involved in champions of SheBoot. But to include it, of course, whenever they're doing the investor pitch to our angel group.
Yeah. Yeah. So every kind of space you're pitching in is a bit different, but with investors, having that ask slide is really important. And what's beautiful about the ask slide is that it really shows, and not the ask slide, but the opportunity of the ask slide and the use of funds, is that it helps demonstrate the way that you think as a team, or the way that what your path is, and your thinking behind the problem, and your thinking behind this is where I want to get to. So if in 18 months, this is where I want to get, then I understand that I really need to have someone who has more business background on my team. I understand that I need to have this. I understand I need to have someone who understands how to get into the US medical, the healthcare space in the US, which is very different, obviously, from Canada. Like I understand that the clinical trial process probably takes longer than I think it does, and all those things. Like those are pieces that you are demonstrating your ability to think through the problems ahead of time through your use of funds. Like it's showing us how you think, which I think is an underratedly wonderful opportunity and also resource. Maybe not underrated on the investor side. They're very aware of the ask and the use of funds, but on the founder side, like a really great opportunity to showcase how you're thinking about what you're going to make use of those funds, but also how you're thinking about the future, and how you're getting from now until 18 months from now or whatever that is. So, Rashmi, I did see your question. Then also, this is an interesting question. Have you seen investor likes, dislikes, unconscious bias play into the investment decision, or is it generally they stick to their investment thesis? I have 100% seen unconscious and not unconscious bias play into investment decisions. And I don't want to like be too downhearted about that or like bring that tone down about it if it's obviously very real. A lot of the time it is unconscious, especially in the spaces I've been in, which is a lot around impact. So they're already aware of and trying to challenge their own biases, but it's still coming up. And it's coming up in those questions that you're seeing where they're saying, I don't get how this is even a problem. I can also guarantee people in this room have pitched people that have come back at them with questions which just ooze bias and essentially just dismiss them from the get-go. And even if the company, in theory, the return on investment's big and all those pieces are in play, if they don't understand. So someone's asking about when you're planning to have kids, can there be problems? 100%. You're also saying like the story in mine was something that you really felt resonated, but there'd be investors I would pitch that to that would not understand that pain point. That's the reason we don't have technology like this currently, right? It's the reason that like the ultrasound patch that was in my slides that was invented in 2022 has not been applied to fetal monitoring yet. We all know this, and it's difficult. I don't know if we all know this, but it's something I'm being in the gender equity space very, very aware of how it impacts people's decisions. So that's about coming back to the question of who do I want as an investor? So I talked about figuring out fit with your investor as opposed to only the other way around. You'll see in the room when someone does not get the vision. It doesn't mean that you have a Frankenstein pitch and you need to change things about it necessarily. It could mean that they don't get the vision. They have not been there. They don't have a friend who's been there. They don't have a loved one who's been there. They don't see the pain. It may even trigger them. Like I've seen investors who get triggered by solutions because it will impact their industry or their job. It could potentially impact their job in the future. And we're all human. So you are for good and bad, you are pitching humans. So that's a beautiful thing. And there's going to be people who become those champions because they love what you do so much and they've been there. They've been in the 48-hour labor, or their wife has, and it terrified them. Or their partner has, I should say, and it terrified them. And those are the people who are going to hear the story and say, I want to learn more. I want to be able to address that pain point. But yeah, unconscious bias works for and against us. And so it is really reading that room to the points earlier, looking into who's leaning in, who's asking questions in a way that feels positive, in a way that feels good, even if it is hard questions, even if it is like the woman I was talking to earlier where that investor kind of like threw 20 questions at her and she walked away feeling not good. She was like, even if that investor wants to invest in me, I don't really want someone like that. So even though that investor was like, this went really well because I asked 1,000 questions and she answered, she was like, that felt really uncomfortable for me. I don't want to work with this person. So that's really important to listen to that as well. And you said I've been asked a few times, when are you planning to have kids? Yeah, I'm sorry that you've experienced that, Rashmi. That's definitely something that as women in STEM do as well, like women in labs, as they're building out these technologies, they often deal with that as well. So it's really, really hard, but we are here to support you. And as I mentioned, this cohort here, this cohort of investors, their entire thesis is to support and to support women and to create more investable businesses that are women-led and serving women. And I think that's really important to keep note of who we're talking to and and be really intentional about that. And I see Sakina, I did see your hand up, so I would love to invite you, and then Marissa, I see you as well. Sakina, do you still have a comment or question? Maybe not. Okay, we'll head to Marissa and Sakina. If it comes up again, just let us know.
I just want to say that that's what we were talking about, the people that don't resonate or they don't understand the problem. Melanie said it hasn't happened to you and it hasn't happened to a friend. That's why SheBoot has that double mandate of increasing women founders and exposure to women founders and increasing the number of women investors in the room, because it's great. SheBoot is 30 women investors that, you know, are kind of in tune to healthcare in the space for women has been neglected for decades, right? So we know that, but there's other issues too that a non-diverse panel of investors would never click on, would never double click on. So the more you have diversity at that investor table, the better it is for everyone. And remember though, that once you're graduated from SheBoot, you do have to go and pitch to those mixed tables. Right? You can't, so if you want to move forward, if you want to go to finish your round and all that stuff. So being aware of those biases, it sucks. But being aware of those biases and being able to answer the question is super important as well.
Yeah. And I think it is like, it's a really great filtering of who you want to work with. Because even like in my pitch, I thought about, do I want to say, my daughter was unable to descend vaginally and use that word? Or do I want to use a different word? And I was like, nope, I don't want to work with someone who can't say vagina, you know, like this is not, that was one of my ways to filter out someone if they couldn't handle that word. So that was also like something that's kind of empowering about pitching, is that you can be thinking about, who do I want to be working with and how am I going to tell my story based on that? Jane.
Right. I just wanted to pick up on Marissa's point there about pitching to mixed tables. And on our Friday pitch practices, I know we've told you before, but I'm just reiterating, those are mixed tables. There will be men in those pitch practices. It's the only part of the SheBoot program where we have men involved for exactly that reason, because chances are that's where you're going to be pitching. So it's really great to get the feedback from the both men and women.
Mm-hmm. And that's something you can also definitely take and leave. Like if they're questioning, is this even a problem? Then you might just say like, yeah, you're not my investor. I don't need to actually even address that in my feedback, or as a point of feedback that I'm going to put into my pitch. I don't need to Frankenstein because of this.
They might just
so
be
that's something.
curious and looking for more information though too,
That
right?
too. Yes.
So I am seeing a wave of the men in the room are kind of going, okay, I don't get it, but can you tell me more about it? So
a different vibe in the way it's asked.
Yeah, different vibe.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. And honestly, the ones who are like, this doesn't feel like a real thing, often won't even ask the question. They just won't, they'll just kind of stay back and not engage in that company. So you won't even know the ones who don't, especially in a group like SPV situation. Sakina, saw your hand going up again. Are you back with us?
Yes, I lost internet. I'm sorry.
No.
This is such a great discussion. How do you propose, like, I know you have to read the room and understand, like, you know, where the question is coming from, like, are they really trying to understand, or, you know, are they being intentionally biased? How do you think we should respond? Like, yeah, you know, you don't, like, you respond in a professional manner, but sometimes, yeah, like from an investor perspective, like, you know, if it is in a group and there is somebody who asks that, you know, a question like that, that's not cool. Like, how do we respond? Any best practices? That would be great.
So I guess it depends on, so I know I know in the DD deep dive workshop, you're gonna dive
Yes.
into this more. And are you taking note of some of these questions, Katie?
Yeah, these are great questions and consistent. And so thanks, Melanie. I was going to hop on afterwards, but we have a session that's dedicated to managing difficult questions, and it's essentially exactly how you might respond, and keep these in mind. And literally, you can practice them live during that session with one of our investors. So whether that's Julia or Jennifer or Chelsea, who will be joining us for that. So I'll add these to the list for sure. But they'll challenge you with maybe some that are a little more nuanced, and that and then you can practice that way. But yeah.
Yeah, that's a good question. And someone mentioned the Investor Ready program in the chat, which is good at recognizing wording that can reduce unconscious bias. They're saying, and Dallas, I saw your point as well, mentioning that you decided to talk about abortions, unplanned pregnancies, and STIs directly and use that as a filter mechanism. So yeah, I think you're going to learn more about how to address these things head on or not, depending on the situation. Like if it's a one-on-one situation, you might decide to not, or you might decide to use it as like an opportunity for some education and advocacy on that topic. But you might just decide like this is not someone I want to continue having the conversation with. But in a collective group, that might feel a bit different. I would hope that other investors maybe in the room would step in and speak up for you if it's something, and the SheBoot team I'm sure would be if it was against their code of conduct. But I know I don't want to dive into too much of it because I also recognize the time at this point. So and really appreciate all the engagement because we have dove into things that I didn't imagine we would at this point, which is amazing to hear, and really appreciate all of you. So I'm going to put a pin in that conversation because I know you're going to have lots of conversations through SheBoot and through those Friday practices, and with your coach, you can talk to them about this as well and maybe brainstorm some ideas, especially if you've already experienced questions that make you uncomfortable. Maybe like take note of those and talk to your coach about that. So at this point, on that note, I know that was that was maybe a lot. So maybe this is a good moment to take even where are we at? It's been an hour and a half. I can see many more of you now. Hello. Okie dokie. So building your pitch. All right. So at Volition, we talk about particular methodology, but it's not anything revolutionary. I wouldn't say, not to downplay or us or that or anything, but I mean, you kind of see the same things come up over and over again when we're talking about ticking the boxes or touching on core elements that investors and judges want to hear. So this was built from with my business partner and I and one of our advisors many years ago, and it's just kind of stayed the same, but then we brought new elements into it and how we teach it since 2017. So this was from watching thousands of pitches and working one-on-one with many hundreds of companies, founders, and investors. And I did also cross-reference with the SheBoot rubric to make sure everything was caught in there. But as I say, it's not, I don't think it's going to be something that you'll be totally shocked by in terms of what we're touching on. But wanted to make sure that we're all on the same page. Now, one thing I do really like about our approach is, of course, that story's at the heart. Of course, we're also putting a pin on story at the heart. But what I like about it is the visual. I'm a very visual learner. So for me, the fact that it's this circle, to me, visually works, because often when we're thinking about pitching, people think about a really like kind of not even linear, not even linear, but kind of like the buckets or the boxes, like very like almost like these pillars that you're getting through, and each slide is a different pillar and it's not connected. So for me, one of the ways that we kind of shifted our own mindset at Volition around pitching was to think about it in this more circular fashion, and think about it almost like a wheel, because especially as you get later stage, or depending on the forum that you're in, especially if it's like a competition, you can play around with where you place things. Now, there's certain things that I have a preference for where they go. I definitely prefer problem at the beginning, because unless there's like a lot of market doubt, or you have a really big, exciting piece of news to share or something like that, problem naturally builds the case for your solution. which I really like that that works for my brain. But you don't necessarily have to do that. And ask at the end, I also really like. I'm a huge advocate of having that ask in there and having it be kind of the end thing. Now, in the orbital pitch, I did put my mission statement again at the end, which is a decision to make. In that case, that founder was, let's say, pitching impact investors and wanted to drive home the mission and the SDGs that were aligned to it. So that maybe questions will come up around like, what is your impact approach, or what's your impact what's your theory of change, or something like that. So that was the kind of questions I was maybe hoping that an investor would ask, and then I'd be able to filter even more like, oh, this is an investor that's aligned with the SDGs that I'm aligned with, or the impact I want to make. So otherwise, I typically have the ask slide last, especially if it's going to be up on the screen for a while, because that's often a space that investors are thinking about, like, how are they using the funds? What's the how can I get in contact with them? What does this look like? What's going through their heads and such. So I usually have the ask at the end. I have been asked many times over the course of the last few years, is it okay to ask somewhere else? It's okay. Some investors don't mind. It's just personal preference for me. And I would say a majority of investors I've met is to have that at the end. And it kind of follows a natural storyline as well to have it there. It's kind of the end, except for it's just one point in your story. If you think of your entrepreneur story as this big epic, and you're just pitching this one chapter, and it's the end of that chapter, and you're like, this is the end, so I can get through the next 5 chapters. That's how I think of it. Obviously, you can see or start to get a read on my brain and how it thinks about stories. But this is like problem, solution, opportunity, ask is very kind of typical, as the typical entrepreneur story kind of follows that arc. But you can play with it, which I love. So that's what I like about it, is to not kind of like dismantle that idea of the boxes or the pillars that we're getting through, and it's this more cohesive kind of or holistic way of thinking about the pitch. So problem. Thank you, Marissa, for mentioning I talked about problem for far too long in that 4-minute pitch. This is one of the most common mistakes that I see, a little bit less now, but especially in the first, like in the 2015 to, I don't know, 2020 something. I know we're still 2020 something, but let's say 2021. So the last couple of years, I've seen a bit more understanding of how much time to spend on problem. But this happens particularly with founders who are a inventor, or who let's go with inventor. The reason why I'm saying inventor in the lab is because this is where you feel most comfortable, is talking about the problem and the solution. This is something you care so deeply about. Like, your life has been about this. Maybe your PhD was about this. Like, I don't know. It's just, this has been your life. And you are also like, people don't get it. So I'm going to have to explain it to them over and over and over again. And I have to spend all my time explaining it, because they're just not going to get it if I don't tell them everything. So they do tend to, not just inventors and kind of like STEM background or science background founders whatsoever. Every founder can absolutely do this, especially if you're really, really excited about, which you are really excited about the problem that you're solving, and if it's a complicated space, or a space you've got a lot of questions around. If there's a lot of doubt around your market and around the market size, maybe you'll spend more time on problem. So that's the reason we tend to see this as one of the biggest problems in a pitch, I think about 2 minutes of my 4-minute pitch was spent on problem. And yes, it's a compelling story, but I probably could have truncated the story a little bit, as well as I could have decided a couple of statistics that I wanted to center on, and the impact that it would create. And as someone else mentioned, I really focused on hospital here, and then was like, hey, I'm going to do D2C. So I loved that. I loved that point that someone made that I unfortunately can't remember who it was. But what's really beautiful about that is that's like the polish that you're going back to be like, does my pitch, when I think about it as this like holistic pitch, does everything make sense with the other pieces? So it's not those like segments, like the pillars. It does have to work together. So like when I'm talking about problem, that is informed by who I'm pitching, is formed by the impact I want to create, social, financial, environmental, whatever it is. It's also informed by my next 18 months, or my path to scalability, or my plan, because the problem is the way that I'm building the case for the solution, which is then backed up by the rest of the pitch. So it all fits together. So I love I think listening to the problem section of people's pitches is fascinating. And you can often pick up a lot on like where where there's maybe some like confusion, or maybe they don't have, you can pick up on things from listening to just the problem. I see something in the chat, so I'm just going to open that. So I was saying, Jane, identify with this. We are in a really complex space where many have failed before, and people often think it's not a big problem. And yes, in STEM. Yeah, exactly. So that's the difficult part. Now I have a segment of the pitch that I call the trust me pitch, which I'll get into in a moment. And that's the element of the pitch that to me is the opportunity to show that even if this is a complex pitch, or sorry, a complex space, we have these traction points. There is this interest. People, yes, it is a real problem that we validated. It's a solution that meets the problem. There is a market that will pay for it, and we understand that market, and we have this plan in place. We understand that might change. We understand there's a lot of work to go. But that's the element. Like if it's a really complex space, often something like a customer story is going to even be more impactful than like a personal story, because you can illustrate a lot with a customer story. So there's different things you can do. Again, we'll get into a lot more on story and like the power of that next week, but there's things to do when it's a complex problem without spending half your time on your problem, because I can Google what the problem is, and you're going to have it in your due diligence space, your data room as well, going into more of what that looks like, and you can answer those questions. Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. So the questions you're answering, is this a real and valid problem? And one I love that SheBoot has on their judge rubric is, will this continue to be a problem? So I love this because we've especially seen since 2020, there have been a lot of companies that come up that are very much fad companies, and you can spot a mile away, especially when you say, oh, well, how will this pivot once we're no longer in lockdown? They have no answer. This is just a company for lockdown, like how, what, is there any other application? Like, why is it all centered on NFTs? Is there any other applications, anything? No? Okay. It's like, like there's these spaces, and you kind of like, investors are usually fairly wise to that, and being like, okay, elephant in the room, let's talk about this. So I doubt that's the case with any of your companies here, but it's a really great one that SheBoot has on their judging sheet, and to be aware of, like, even if you're focusing on a beachhead market, and thinking about like thinking about how to communicate what the longer term strategy is, if it feels like the beachhead is maybe biased or not something they consider niche, so like, what are other verticals I'm thinking about, or why do I need to be thinking about other verticals? So anyways, that's kind of an aside there, but I really liked that piece. Problem is where you can create that emotional connection and trigger curiosity and excitement, which is great, but doesn't have to be super long. And this is where you are starting to validate that this is a problem that really does need to be solved. So with early stage, how you're doing that and quantifying that this is a real problem is things like market trends, reports, statistics, and common sense estimations. If you're later stage, ideally you can demonstrate with your own research and development and customer data that you have. So that's kind of, we understand that you're at many different stages. So you don't have to have a perfect story here, but you've done your research. So that's problem. Now, as I mentioned, problem naturally moves into solution. So you've described the problem, and ideally how you're describing the problem makes sense for the solution that you are pitching here. Now I'm saying that, and it sounds silly to say it out loud, but it happens where we see a story and a problem framing that then doesn't have any logical tie-in with the solution. And it's usually because they have gotten feedback from maybe a certain type of, like, I know one that it was like, the founder felt that they had to position it in the problem statement as we are addressing an environmental issue. And they talked all about environmental issues, but then their product was like a food item or something like that had like natural packaging, but that wasn't even like a central part of their product, their packaging, So like that was, and we were like, what, like, you set me up thinking you were going to be doing one thing, and then you gave me a solution that I don't understand how that ties into the problem. And that happens more often than you might think. And it's often because of a Frankenstein pitch situation where you've gotten a bunch of feedback. So that's one way you can tell if you have that. So here you're looking at, does the solution meet the need? How is your solution different? Is there a problem solution fit? and will customers actually pay for it? So here, thinking about the value proposition, which is that intersection of what the customer or user really wants and needs, and what you are really great at. And so again, in my situation here, I was going to be selling to hospitals, not just direct to consumer. So since that's going to be the main person who's buying, my main customer, potentially, I need to be thinking about, will they actually buy this, and what's the pain points in their mind, and like the pain of trying to go from like that them going from the historical technology to this, and will the users, the women who are in labor, will they actually want to use it, and how will that feel to them? And it's a new technology as well during a really like high stress time. So there's a lot of like things to be thinking about at that moment in time. And so think about who your customer is as well as who your user is, if those are different. Now, something that I like to talk about here is the storyteller's tool, which is show, don't tell. This is especially if you're doing a shorter pitch, and like you have 10 to 12 minutes, I think 10 to 13 minutes. It's not a terribly short pitch, but it's not a terribly long pitch either. So there are things that you can do that are going to help illustrate your points rather than having to drive them home, so that you can focus on areas that you tend to be getting more questions around, and that are maybe more integral to building that like trust me pitch. So if you have mock-ups, if you have or the actual product, and if you're pitching live, to Stephanie's point of what Stephanie did in Montreal, have the live item, because that made people so excited for Stephanie's product and wanting to buy it. And then they were like, oh, other people will buy this because I want to buy it, you know? And that's incredibly powerful. And they didn't have to like explain it in any like really fulsome way, just have to show it, which is really, really powerful. So if you have the real product, fantastic. If you are a product-based company, of course, if you have mock-ups, if you have sketches, flows, concept art, even branding, all of those elements are going to help us understand what you're talking about. Like this orbital product would have been very difficult to explain out loud. So the visual, even though it's still a weird visual, granted, but it kind of gives a better idea of what I'm doing here, at least what my first MVP looks like. And branding will show, like all these things show thought that's gone into building this business, that this is something real that I'm building, and that it shows you how far along I am in the development without having to talk about that. The customer story I mentioned, super powerful. Obviously I didn't do a customer story with my case, but if I had a customer and could talk about how it changed their life, and how it also then could talk about how it like decreased things like the cost of labor overtime for the hospitals. Like if I can tell a story, or user story, or customer story, then that can really naturally tie into other pieces. And then if you have a real customer story, you're not having to really say, we have customers, believe me. Like you can say, this is a customer, and then you can say, and we have 10,000 just like this person. We need help to get another, 100,000. This is what we need in order to do that. Can you help us out? Or would you like to help us out and be a part of that? So customer story, if you can pull that off, is really powerful and a really great way to tie your story and your why into your solution and your opportunity and your ask. This is also where you could have a product roadmap. People put it at different points, but you could have that here. And you could also, through something like a customer story, you can also answer questions around complex business models, because you're talking about who the user is, and you're talking about how the different, like if it's a double-sided marketplace or something, you can be speaking to that through a customer story as opposed to trying to explain it, which can sometimes take up a lot of time and be very confusing. So that's a little bit on the show, don't tell principle, which again, we can talk about next week in more depth. So would love to, I don't think I have time right now to pull anyone up to do their problem solution pitch, but maybe have that in mind for next week even, to be thinking about, especially if you have been struggling with a complex problem. If you have in your complex space and you're struggling with your problem solution pitch, a segment of your pitch, keep that in mind, maybe work through that a little bit over the next week, and then we can dive into that a little bit next week. If we have time today, I'm happy to stay on a little bit later as well, but I am gonna move on at this time. So opportunity, this is the section that I call the trust me pitch, which is, because problem solution to me is your foundation, and that's where you started. It's very important, obviously. That's kind of what you share when you're networking and when you have like a 90-second pitch and all those good things. But this is the like, trust me, I can do this. Trust me, the team can do this. We have already done X, Y, and Z. We're going to do X, Y, and Z. And this is where you can like pepper in traction, and you can pepper in little bits of trust all over the place through visuals as well as through your language, which I love. So this is a section that's kind of on those parts that a lot of people's voices dip down and don't really want to talk about, which is the market traction, team, and return. Often, especially again with like inventors or people heavily involved in building a solution, heavily dedicated to the problem and looking to find a solution that matches that, or that will solve for that problem. Getting into these details can feel icky, or can feel not as natural, at least especially when you're first starting out, or if you're pivoting or something like that. So opportunity, as I mentioned, peppering in the traction. People will talk about traction. I like to think about that as like forward momentum. So showing how are you moving forward in the business. I would say in my orbital pitch, I was okay at this. I did not like underline and highlight the traction really well, in my opinion. I mentioned that there had been a pilot and the impact that had made, but I didn't, and I had a couple other little pieces peppered a little bit, but there's a lot more areas that you can do that in. And next week we'll have the video of Carlin from VotaSafe doing hers, and she does a beautiful job of peppering in traction. But ways that you can demonstrate your forward momentum and these bits of traction are things like, which is really validating your MVP, for instance, or where you're at, is things like newsletter lists and testimonials, pre-orders, growing your user base, showing and growing user base, growing revenue, of course, that's an obvious one, but also things like signups and letters of intent. It can also be patent strategy. It can be just demonstrating how your research and development is moving along, where you're at in clinical trials. It can be even your network and experience. So speaking to the board that you've developed and how that's addressing some gaps you have. So these are all showing forward momentum. And I saw there is a message in the chat. Okay, that was a one-on-one message. Fantastic. Okay. And then competition. Question you're answering is, how busy is this market? Where does your value proposition fit in? And is it compelling enough? How will you keep the competition at bay? So a common pitfall that I like to underline here is when people say we have no competition, which happens more often than we like to see. And is there anyone here who has been struggling with speaking about your competition? See at least one, two-ish. Yeah. Now I'd love to hear maybe just from one of you, like what that's looked like what has that struggle look like for you?
So I could jump in here. Our struggle is that what we're doing isn't being done by anybody else, but it sounds arrogant when I say it that way. So I don't really know how to say it I mean, it's like the problem we're trying to solve is not being solved right now by any other, products on the market, but that sounds ridiculous. So I don't know how to convey it better.
Yeah. I mean, there are situations where things are truly novel, but then you're often looking at what are you comparable or so what I'm looking for. I can't remember the word I'm looking for, but essentially comparables, because there's typically like there's typically like a historic way things have been done. So like in the case of orbital, let's say, I didn't have it on my competition slide. Yeah, I don't have it on there, but I mean, just using a normal, like them wheeling in a, or just the fetal monitor, the historic fetal monitor. That is one of my competitors. And that's a big one because even though it's not the same thing that I'm creating and has it's very different when you look at the actual specifics of it, people are going to think of it as being the same, and the hospitals are going to say, why would I choose to switch over to your product when we've been using this for like a bazillion years and we already have them in not in every room. It's one of the problems, but they have a bunch of them. Why would we then spend the money to shift? So it's not like a necessary, it is a direct competitor, but you wouldn't necessarily think of it as a direct competitor. And there might be competitors who are more complementary, or like people you would work with. It can be another way to be thinking about competition. But I'd have to know more about the space you're in. I don't know if Marissa, you have any thoughts on this status quo's competition. Yeah, exactly. Have you any thoughts on this as well?
Yeah, so I just put in the chat that status quo is also competition. Why is the option you bring to the table better than not doing anything at all? So that's something that you can address. I like the comment about comparables. There might be no one doing the exact same thing that you're doing out in the market, but how are they filling that need? And how is this better than those other options? I also wanted to say that you want to make sure that you're identifying who's paying for the product versus who's benefiting from the product, right? Because they're going to want to know when you do your projections, who's your client that's writing the check and who are the people that might benefit from.
That's a really good point, even on this competition aspect, because the people who are buying it are fine with the status quo, and they're probably paying for something that they're already locked in with, especially with SaaS, that they don't want to, for them it's a cost to break the status quo, whereas the users are not the ones writing the check. They don't like the current status quo product, but they don't have any say. So that is serious competition.
Yeah, and I also sometimes when people say we don't have competition, that often makes my brain go to, does that just mean other people have tried this and it didn't work? Which is a big red flag. So you don't want to say we have no competition, but that might also be a cue for you. Like, did other people try this or try some way of doing it and it didn't work? And why will we succeed? Why are we not going to be one of those statistics? That's another way to kind of frame it for yourself.
Yeah, I like that, because that's the problem. So yeah, that's the problem we have, because we are so with therapeutics, and in a space where there literally have been about 20 companies that have failed, and some of them are quite big names, and we know why. And we know why we think we'll succeed where they don't, but it's sort of one of these Frankenstein moments as well. And that because we keep getting the question, because people are skeptical, we kind of I've spent quite a lot of time, number one, how to construct the competition slide, but also bring in the historical element without getting too technical. So it's an area that I really struggle with this one.
Yeah, really interesting. Yeah, that's something I think that working one-on-one or having a conversation with your coach about would be helpful as well. Because yeah, I know only a couple hands went up with like, this is a difficult area, but competition's again a really interesting space and opportunity for how to talk about where you fit in the market and why you are going to be the ones to make it. It also helps us get an understanding of where you think you fit in the market. Like, where do you think your business model fits here? And what's interesting is then when investors say, oh, like I would have thought this other way that you would do this. And that can open the opportunity for you to be like, oh, yeah, that's interesting. Or you're like, yeah, we've already thought about that. This is why we're doing it this way. Dallas.
Yeah, quick question. Something that when we are talking about competition, something that comes up is our like competition versus collaboration and like potential partners, because there are a lot of synergies with what could be considered a competitor, like an indirect competitor is how we frame them, but they can also be a really opportunistic partnership for us. And sometimes I will answer the question like that, or I'll talk about our like competitors and flip it to potential collaborators. From an investor perspective, is that like a bullshit answer or kind of a way to deflect, or is that intriguing?
For me, so collaborator was the exact word I was trying to find the other, like just a couple minutes ago, and I was like, I can't remember the word. It's collaborator. I love the collaborator approach because that shows even more market opportunity. I think that's beautiful. And Marissa, I saw you nodding your head a bit.
Yeah, no, I totally agree with that. Like the term I've heard used is cooperation, but you do have to answer the question in terms of how they're not going to wipe you out completely. Right. So there's still a competitor, but there's opportunities to collaborate in the future, and maybe you can coexist, and that'll be a benefit to everyone. But investors want to know that you're aware and that you won't be blindsided. So as many cards that you put on the table towards that is good.
Yeah, I've seen
Thank
an
you, I appreciate that.
interesting. I'm sorry, Dallas. I've seen an interesting way that people have done it, where they're also thinking about collaborators as the potential exit strategy, and have been saying like in this case where it was a very similar company that was acquired by this company and worked with them in this way. That's our approach to this market. So that's also really interesting. But it's like, to Marissa's point, showing that you're thinking about the potential problems down the line, the challenges down the line, as opposed to, Marissa, you said it perfectly, being blindsided. I don't need to say it again. It's perfectly. Oh, I've already said it again. Sorry. So I'm driving home that point. Love what you said, Marissa. Fantastic.
I have a quick question.
Super fun. Yes,
as well, if possible. Kind of tagging on that, we also get asked to like that the competition competitors, but also then the future pipelines. But there's also, I feel like, a point of, we've signed NDAs with some very large kind of groups and multinational, in which you can't talk about it, but it's in the pipeline. So how do you show it as that traction piece that we're in those conversations without naming them, but you can say that all you want, and do people believe you? I don't know. I don't think we found a way to incorporate that. And so it's still not necessarily a part of the pitch that we do.
I'm trying to think of how this was done on one I recently saw. And Marissa, if you have something to jump in right away off the top of your head. This is a not uncommon problem. And there are ways. So I believe how they did it was they said, we are in talks with government agencies. Was there, and I believe it's, how did they word it? It was something like, we're in talks with these kinds of people, and we are, like, give as much detail as you're able to, like, we are this amount down that along that process, or like what you can say. That's how they typically, like, if it's a big traction point. Because the thing is, if you're saying, like, it's one traction point that's really important, but if you're saying it out loud and the people in the room are saying, I don't believe you, then there might be other points in the pitch where we can pepper in some more trust me, like strengthen your trust me pitch, so that when you say we're in talks with some pretty big people in government, that they believe you, and that they will say, okay, once I've signed an NDA, maybe I'll learn about more of that in the due diligence.
And the purpose of the NDA that you've signed with those large organizations, that you just want to get clarity around what it is that they don't want to come through. Is it just their name that they don't want to come? Is it the amount that they I understand the purpose, why they would want you to sign an NDA, but on the other hand, they want you to be successful. And it's such a great pivotal point that you've got this attraction. Can they really expect you to not include it? So just get clarity on what it is you're not allowed to say. And to Melanie's point, as much as you can, help it show your traction.
Great, thank you.
That's great. Dallas.
Yeah, I've been in a similar situation, Bronwyn, and we also have NDAs with large telehealth companies, and it's primarily been to discuss terms and to show our product. And prior to engaging in an NDA, and sometimes we've even written it in there, that we get their permission to use their name in certain contexts, and we get their permission to share this with investors or within pitches. Typically, the teams we're working with are like their innovation team. So they've worked with startups before and they understand the game, and they get it and they're okay with that. But yeah, typically it's like for a specific purpose, not necessarily to hide that we're in conversation. And then that's what I'll use as like a traction point. saying that we are in conversation or we're establishing relationships with these companies for this purpose, and this is where we're at in those conversations, but always just like getting permission from that team first has been my approach.
Yeah.
Great, thank you for the feedback.
Yeah, no problem. I think the bigger flag is once you get into the due diligence conversations, if you're still saying, no, I swear I have like a big deal coming down, like I just can't tell you anything about it, but it's big. And I've seen that. I've seen founders say that, whether it was true or not, I don't know. But like that's where the problems come up as well. But that's why that's due diligence there. Awesome. Thank you so much for the questions. So what do we have here? So a business model. The main pitfall I see with business model is when it's not well thought out, especially when it's complicated, like a two-sided marketplace, two or multiple-sided marketplace, or when there is a different user from the buyer and that's not communicated effectively. The pitch maybe focuses too much on the user, so it's more of a sales. Oh, sorry, that's not well. It's kind of more of a sales pitch, but in like a weird way. Like it's not thinking about the audience in mind of the investor, about who's actually gonna be paying for these things. So thinking about business model and how you're presenting that to the audience that you're pitching to. And then financials, kind of like with Bronwyn, your question around the NDAs and what you can share. With financials, I say, tell us what you do know. So a lot of the time, especially earlier stage, people will say, well, I don't have a lot of information. I feel like these projections are based on nothing. That might be a bit earlier stage than people here today. I think a lot of you have more traction potentially, but I also know some of you possibly like more R&D, and it still feels like it's quite down the line. But if you don't have anything, just again, you're not making things up. You are like, show us something that is realistic and matches your milestones and your timeline and your raise. Bring in someone who maybe, if you don't have someone with financial acumen on your team, ask the SheBoot team, hey, can we talk to a financial coach so we can build that out and have it be something I feel confident talking about, because we can tell if you don't feel confident talking about, especially once you get to questions. This is something you want to ensure that you have an understanding of what your unit economics might look like. You've thought it through. And if you have no idea what those could possibly be, you still have thought through what is that, like, when are we going to break even potentially? Like, what does that look like in this journey? So having some understanding of your path to scalability and path to profitability is what we're looking for here. I saw a question. Oh, finance workshop this Thursday. Perfect. I won't linger. Great. So there is no opportunity without you. This is really important. Someone mentioned about on mine that I didn't speak about my board members here, and particularly if you are getting some questions around like the trust me pitches and maybe not fleshed out to the degree that you're getting like lots of questions about like, well, how do you know this? It feels like you don't have the expertise on your team. How are you going to get into the US? You don't understand, you don't understand, you don't have this, you don't have that. And it's constantly about the gaps, showing that you do have a board that can support you in that growth, that they're going to be there to help you in bringing in those experts. A lot of time, if it's more like an R&D, not even early stage, but or even at stage you're pitching at R&D, it is going to be a lot heavier on like the engineering. Your team will be a lot heavier on the engineering side of things and maybe not have a ton on like the business and sales. And that's going to come up as a red flag for investors, or at least from what I've seen, that ends up coming up as a red flag for a lot of investors. But if you address it within the team slide, even saying like some people even like on their team slide, they'll show their team structure and they'll have like those like grayed out ones to indicate these are not filled yet, but I'm aware that this is what I'm going to be hiring with this, to your point, Marissa, the use of funds, like this is what I'm going to be hiring because I understand that this is a gap on my team. So that's a way that some people will do that if it's a founder that constantly gets questions around their team. I've seen that being a way that they address that within their pitch, and it's worked well because it shows the planning and the thinking behind it. So you want to be kind of highlighting the track record, especially if you're earlier stage, domain expertise, unique skills, and that plan for future hires and how to fill gaps. And then plan to execute can go at many different points in the pitch, But here, the idea was, again, how is the team approaching the problem? Is the plan realistic and achievable? Is it realistic yet bold? Which I believe the SheBoot Judge rubric talks about that, like being realistic yet bold, which I really like that language. So I only have, we're not going to get to like practice at the end here, and I only have talking about the ask next. So at this point, which I can jump to here, but I know sometimes there is questions around plan to execute and all these pieces as well around like this trust me pitch. So with our time remaining, maybe a couple of minutes, is there anything more on the trust me pitch? You can see talking about market and model fit, proven traction, competitive advantage, or where you fit in the market, unit economics and financials, which I know there's going to be a workshop about coming up, and team to execute, or talking about your.
I'm only looking for strategic investors. Now, it also depends at what stage you are in your journey. Maybe earlier on in the journey, can't really afford, you need to keep the bus moving, right? So maybe you can't afford to be looking for that strategic partner, but there will come a time where you can say, okay, here's who I'm looking for. I get the sense that you're maybe thinking that all the founders are in a pool and the investors get to pick, but that's not, you also need to be able to pick, right? There's a pool of investors, and you also need to go fishing in that pond, not just, be on the other end of the pool. I don't know if that's helpful, but.
No, it is. It is. No, it is. Thank you. I appreciate that.
Yeah, I think that's really important. And thanks to everyone who's jumping in on the chat and speaking to how it is really hard, and it's exhaustion. It is exhausting, and can be demoralizing, and all those pieces. And yeah, I feel that. And I think someone was saying here, where did I read it? Cheryl was saying, yeah, we took a break for the summer to focus on traction, because that endless cycle of raising can feel like you're really getting away from the impact that you want to create, which can be really hard, because all founders really want to create this incredible impact with their product, and you believe in it and want to get it out there, and it just feels like constantly coming up against these walls. So I get that. I understand. I'm also a business owner who's come up against a lot and gone through my own due diligence processes, and it's really hard. So yeah, kudos to what you're doing, to everything you're doing, and to where you are here today. And you have a lot of support in the SheBoot space. So I think take advantage of that as much as you can. Talk to your coaches about how you're feeling about this. I think that strategic investor point is really important. Like I mentioned, I think at the beginning, like thinking about, how do I want to feel when I'm pitching this person? How do I want them to feel? Who is my ideal investor within this collective? How do I feel today? How do I feel about my pitch? How do I feel about how I'm fundraising? Those are all important questions to sometimes take that time to pause and consider, so that we can get back to feeling like you are pitching to the person you want to be hearing you. Does that make sense? Or to Marissa's point, you might be at a point where you just need some cash flow. And maybe investment's not that moment then. Maybe to Cheryl's point, taking a pause for growing traction. But we're the start of SheBoot, so we're not going to do that right now. But but I think it's a good point to be thinking about like where that's coming from. And I applaud you for bringing it up as well. I'm sure it's not super easy to vocalize that and feel like you might be the only one in the room, but it sounds like you're not the only one in the room. So thank you for that. Yeah, absolutely. And yeah, deciding on who to invest in is also very, very difficult, but a different kind of difficult, I think. Yeah. So let's see, on that note, where was I? I was at Ask, which there could be a whole workshop probably on Ask, but you're going to talk about financials. You're going to talk about a lot of things over the next 6 weeks. You're going to be having those pitch practice conversations every week. We'll talk about story next week. You'll talk about pitch design in a few weeks. You'll have opportunity to do pitch coaching, so you can talk about Ask to your Ask and how that fits in, or like how you're going to speak to the use of funds and what your plan is if you don't have a super if you're walking into this not knowing what is my use of funds? What is the amount I'm raising overall? Like, I don't know if some of you, the 300,000 is your raise, or if you are raising larger amounts and this is a part of that. You're all maybe at different kind of points of comfortability talking about that, or of like understanding your financial situation, your breakdown of what your use of funds will look like, and how that will contribute to your next 18 months. So I think use this time over the next six weeks to really understand that, and get comfortable talking about your ask and talking about what you're going to do with that, and the transformation that it will create for your company and for your product, and how it's going to help you create the impact you're wanting to create, or you're looking to create. Kind of quick tips is to think about it as what it's going to help you achieve. So we're very simply, like, we're looking for X to achieve Y, like profitability, market lead generation, increase sales, break even. Please don't say we're looking to raise money to just to do R&D and sales and marketing. That means absolutely nothing to me. I don't know what you're talking about. Like, you need to give me more than that. That's kind of like a very standard answer. And it might be true. Maybe it is for R&D and marketing, but what's the breakdown? Sorry, one second. And I've seen people say we're putting it all into marketing, but don't actually have the team to execute the plan that they have. And they need a lot of people on the team that are not marketing. Like, where are you getting the money to pay for the people that you need on your team when all of the use of funds are going to marketing? So it needs to all kind of make sense again. Sorry, if you think about the pitch as that kind of like holistic circle again, thinking about, if you start with the end in mind of my ask, everything else in the pitch needs to make sense, so that I don't end at the ask and be super confused as to why you're asking for this amount for these things, when the rest of the pitch kind of told a different story. It all needs to come together in this beautiful ending, which again is something we'll talk about more next week. And I feel like for SheBoot there are set terms. Is that correct?
Each founder will be having a conversation with 2 of our investors and co-founders to discuss what the terms looks like for them. We have general terms that we share with founders in the beginning, in terms of that gauges essentially where the likely founder will be that will receive investment, but there's flexibility there based on where the founders are in their business are. Yeah, so we'll be scheduling that. It's a long-winded way by saying no, not necessarily, and you'll have those conversations with with Jennifer, Julia later this month before we get to the pitch. Yeah.
Cool. Okay. So I'm not going to harp on this. We have like a minute left. So I just want to say, whether or not you are an impact-based business, thinking about impact in terms of the social, environmental, financial impact, this kind of a lens to apply to the entire pitch, in that it helps you quantify the vision, how you want to grow, and it helps inform the problem solution and those pieces. So again, this is not an impact first kind of investor group. So I don't want to spend too much time here, but want to mention, in case you are an impact first company, and it's something that we can talk about more. If you want to reach out, it's something we can discuss more, how you want to incorporate impact into your pitch. And I believe that's that. I will share the slides with Katie, so you'll have those shortly, and you can of course reach out anytime with questions about this, and I will be here next week as well. Really appreciate everyone showing up and asking really great questions. Really appreciate Jane and Marissa and Katie for everything that you contributed to the conversation as well, to make that to bring your perspective really, really helpful. Over to you, Katie.